Hello everyone, welcome to the Elitist Gamer. This is Epix911 and my review of Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2 is an action role-playing game developed by From Software and published here in North America by Namco Bandai Games. It is a direct sequel to Dark Souls, which itself is a spiritual sequel to Demon Souls, the 2009 surprise breakout title of the series. And yep, that game itself was a spiritual sequel to the Kingsfield series of games, released on the Sony PlayStation and PlayStation 2. As with the first title, Dark Souls 1, the player is free to select their class, a variable starting gift, and the slimmest basics of physical appearance before embarking on a quest that will end in every type of death someone who was really in this fantasy world could possibly experience. It is published on both the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. This review is based on the PlayStation 3 version of the game. I will cover all areas of the title people normally look for in a review, and give it the Elitist Gamer rating, which is either worthy of your time or not worthy of your time, with some additional details, just because I'm feeling friggin' generous, and I got nothing better to do until hockey starts. As stated in the opening, Dark Souls 2 is an action role-playing game. Combat happens in real time, and is a basic version of the type of gameplay mechanics you'd find in an MMO boss fight. Each adversary has a basic attack set that you need to learn to counter. Often, there are more than a few varied tells to these attack patterns, and the counter depends on the class you have selected. For example, pick a sorcerer for any given encounter against, let's say, an infantryman, and you are going to have a completely different experience for that encounter than a warrior would. Which makes sense. Warrior fights in close, the sorcerer is going to attack from a distance. While the game has puzzles, the main puzzles come in the form of the boss fights themselves. One gets the feeling that the gameplay has begun to drift towards the Monster Hunter series, in terms of farming ingredients whose primary component usually comes from the tougher encounters in the game. That brings us to the main gameplay mechanic, which, to put it simply and bluntly, is you dying repeatedly. It's through these deaths that you can either learn from the encounter and terrain, or get fucking frustrated. Charge back in like Conan the Barbarian, and you are sure to repeat the death experience over and over, until you either learn, or you throw your controller across the room in disgust. Choose the former, and you are in for a challenging and exciting gameplay experience that no other series has captured as successfully. And if you are the type of gamer that enjoys combative challenges in your gameplay, then you will simply love Dark Souls 2. This is the area where the game truly shines. In fact, the boss fight mechanics and atmosphere is as close as I have come to recreating the feeling of an MMO raid boss fight in a single-player experience. Expect your first playthrough of the game to take at least 50 to 70 hours, depending on how much grinding and side quests you undertake. I did get the feeling that some parts of the game were very linear, and while the previous title was also quite linear, it managed to feel just a bit more open to me. But that isn't a huge complaint, as the tight and narrow passages, broken up by the occasional open environments, help to contribute to the atmosphere of the game, which ranges from the aforementioned extremely open to extremely claustrophobic. And like the previous games, each subsequent death, when alive, will lower your hit points in undead form even a bit more dramatically than in those previous games, making for a slightly more difficult gameplay experience. Each class in the game feels unique, and not merely like a slightly different version of the same cookie-cutter base template. Earlier, I compared the Sorcerer and Warrior. Using that same example, expect a different combative gameplay experience with either of these classes, and a different experience in terms of the solving of some of the puzzles. Graphics are presented in 720p on the PlayStation 3, but compared to Dark Souls 1, there's a definite step back in terms of both texture details and shadow effects. This is no doubt due to the developers going for full 720p this time around. Whereas the PS3 uses VSync, which results in non-polygon tearing screen effect, the Xbox ditches this effect to produce a slightly faster frame rate, but at the cost of some screen tearing. While challenging and fun gameplay is the primary element that Dark Souls 2 delivers, you can't help but be a bit disappointed that graphics have taken such a step back, primarily when compared to the earlier gameplay footage released last summer, which showed a myriad of physics and shadow effects that quite simply never made it to the final release copy. If graphics are important to you, and you have an average or above average PC gaming rig, then I highly suggest you wait for the PC release of Dark Souls 2, which developer From Software has stated this time is being developed on the PC from the ground up, as opposed to the terabad port that people experienced in the first title. Dark Souls 2, like its predecessor, is primarily a single-player experience, with a unique twist on the multiplayer aspect. Multiplayer takes place in the form of being invaded and invading other online players. You can also enlist the aid of these players to assist with things like boss fights. In fact, without spoiling anything, some of the later boss fights really come alive when this mechanic is used. Itemization. Itemization to me is an important RPG component, and this game delivers in spades and then some. There are literally hundreds of different items to purchase, craft, and find throughout the game world. This game will take you to a min-max heaven if that's your thing. So where does this leave the game in terms of a rating? Well, the Elitist Gamer can definitely say that this game is worthy of your time if, and here's the caveat, you enjoy real-time RPGs with challenging boss fight mechanics. In reviewing this game, I've obviously highlighted my biases in terms of gameplay challenges and things like varied itemization as being important to me. But even without these, you could pick half a dozen other positives that would ensure Dark Souls 2 is a positive gameplay experience. Thank you for watching, and as always, leave me your comments and impressions, whether you agreed with me in this review or not. I'm interested in hearing both sides. Until next time, cheers gamers.